What I'm about to tell you took me months to understand. For a long time, I thought this story was about one horrible sentence. Looking back, it wasn't. The sentence just made me notice something I'd spent 12 years pretending not to see. The truth was, I had become so good at taking care of everybody that nobody remembered I was a person who needed care too. A week before my birthday, my mother-in-law said, "Honestly, the greatest gift would be your funeral flowers. I am Margaret Ellis, a 32-year-old pediatric nurse from Columbus, Ohio, and I actually stopped chewing when Evelyn Brooks smiled across the table and said it. 20 people sat around my father-in-law's dining room. My husband, Thomas Ellis, laughed awkwardly. "Mom, come on," he said. Evelyn shrugged. "What?" I meant she'd finally get some rest. Margaret worries about everything. A few people laughed nervously. My 12-year-old daughter, Sophie Ellis, looked at me. "Grandma," she whispered. Evelyn smiled sweetly. "Honey, grown-ups joke differently." Thomas squeezed my hand. "Don't take everything personally, Margaret." That hurt more than the sentence because everybody heard it, and nobody thought I deserved an apology. Funny thing is, Sophie stopped smiling after that. And I didn't understand why until much later. The next morning, I was making blueberry pancakes when Sophie sat quietly at the counter. Usually she talked nonstop before school. That morning, she just pushed syrup around her plate. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" I asked. She shrugged. "Grandma says weird things." I smiled sadly. "Sometimes people do." Sophie looked up. "Dad said you shouldn't let it bother you." I laughed softly. "Your dad likes peace." She frowned. "But what if peace hurts somebody?" I didn't answer because honestly I didn't know. Later that afternoon, my closest friend Megan Price called. "Birthday plans?" she asked. I laughed. "Apparently funeral flowers." Silence. "Margaret," she said. "What?" I repeated it. Megan sighed. "And Thomas," I smiled without humor. "He said I take things too personally." Megan was quiet for a second, then she asked softly, "Do you ever get tired of being everybody's understanding person?" I almost answered no. Instead, I started crying, because I suddenly realized I couldn't remember the last time somebody asked what I wanted. 3 days after the dinner, I was folding laundry when my sister-in-law, Rebecca Turner, called. "Margaret, are you busy?" she asked. I looked at the pile of tiny socks in front of me and laughed. "That's usually a bad sign." Rebecca laughed too. "Can you watch the kids Saturday?" I closed my eyes. "Saturday was my birthday." "Rebecca, it's my birthday." Silence. Then she said, "Oh, right." I waited. Finally she added, "You're just better with them than anybody else." There it was again, not gratitude, expectation. That evening Thomas came home carrying groceries. "Rebecca called?" he asked. I nodded. "She wants childcare on my birthday." He shrugged. "Just for a few hours." I stared at him. "Do you hear yourself?" Thomas frowned. "What?" I laughed softly. "Nobody even asks anymore, they just assume." He put the bags down. "Margaret, helping family isn't a bad thing." I looked at him carefully. "No, but being treated like a service isn't great either." And for the first time, Thomas didn't have an answer. The next morning, my phone rang while I was finishing paperwork at the hospital. The caller ID made me smile immediately. "Linda Morales." "Linda," I answered. "Margaret Ellis," she said dramatically. "Still saving children and forgetting yourself?" I laughed. Linda had supervised me years ago before moving overseas. "What do you need?" I asked. "Actually," she said, "what do you need?" I rolled my eyes. "That sounds dangerous." Linda laughed. "I'm serious. The pediatric clinic in Zurich needs a temporary nurse for 1 year, housing included." I nearly dropped my pen. "Zurich, beautiful city," she said. "Great staff, good pay. No family members volunteering you for things." I laughed harder than I should have. Then she asked quietly, "When was the last time you did something because you wanted to?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. After we hung up, I stared at the application link for 10 straight minutes. And honestly, that terrified me more than moving to another country ever could. That night I sat on the porch while Sophie chased fireflies in the yard. Thomas stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You look serious," he said. I smiled nervously. "Linda called," he nodded. "The friend from Switzerland?" I looked at him. "She offered me a nursing position in Zurich." His eyebrows lifted. "For how long?" 1 year. Silence. Then he laughed. I smiled nervously. "Only if Sophie wants to stay here for the school year." We promised we'd make that decision together. The words hit harder than he intended. "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. Thomas looked genuinely confused. "Because your life is here." I stared at him. "You mean everybody else's life is here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Across the yard, Sophie caught a firefly and smiled for the first time all week. I watched her carefully. Because suddenly I wasn't thinking about Switzerland. I was thinking about what happens when you spend so long taking care of everybody else that you forget you're allowed to choose yourself. If you've ever been there, stay with me. The next decision changed everything. 2 months later, I was drinking coffee beside Lake Zurich when Megan called. "Well," she asked, "how's Europe?" I smiled. "Peaceful," she laughed. "Meanwhile, Ohio is chaos." I blinked. What happened? Megan sighed. Rebecca's exhausted. Evelyn's furious, and Thomas forgot Sophie's dentist appointment. I sat quietly. Is Sophie okay? She's fine, Megan said quickly, but everybody keeps saying the same thing. I frowned. What? Megan laughed without humor. Margaret used to handle this. I stared at the water. Funny thing was, I hadn't disappeared. I still called Sophie every night. I still sent birthday gifts. I just wasn't fixing problems anymore. That evening, Thomas called. How's Switzerland? He asked. Beautiful, I answered. Silence. Then quietly, things are harder here. I smiled sadly. Harder than what? He exhaled. Harder than I thought. And honestly, that was the first time in 12 years I'd ever heard my husband say that without expecting me to solve it. 3 weeks later, Sophie called crying. My heart nearly stopped. Sweetheart, what's wrong? I asked. She sniffled. Grandma said women who leave families always regret it. My chest tightened. What did Dad say? Silence. Then Sophie whispered, nothing. I closed my eyes. Honey, are you safe? Yes, she answered quickly. Dad took me for ice cream after. I smiled. Good. Then she whispered something that broke me. Mom, everybody misses what you do. But I miss you. I stopped breathing for a second. Sophie, she wiped her nose. I don't miss pancakes. I don't miss laundry. I miss when you laugh. Tears rolled down my face. Sweetheart, I love you. She smiled softly. I know, then she added, Dad yelled at Grandma today. I blinked. He did, Sophie nodded. He told her she doesn't get to talk about you like that anymore. And honestly, hearing that made me happy, but it also made me sad. Because protecting me shouldn't have taken losing me first. 3 months later, Thomas stood outside my apartment in Zurich holding flowers and looking 10 years older. I laughed softly. Those aren't funeral flowers, are they? He actually smiled. Then his eyes filled with tears. I deserve that. We sat beside the lake with coffee between us. Finally he said, I confronted Mom. I nodded. Sophie told me. He rubbed his face. Margaret, I spent 12 years asking you to understand everybody. I never asked anybody to understand you. I stayed quiet. Mom said you'd come back eventually, he continued. She said women always forgive. I looked at the water. And, he laughed sadly. For the first time in my life I told her she was wrong. Silence stretched between us. Then he whispered, I love you. I smiled through tears. Thomas, I believe you. His face lit up. Then I gently shook my head. But love without protection feels lonely. And suddenly, he understood why I wasn't coming home. 2 weeks after Thomas flew back to Ohio, I signed the divorce papers. Not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly at my kitchen table with chamomile tea beside me and rain tapping against the window. The papers secured joint custody, ensuring Sophie would move to Zurich with me after her school year ended. Later that evening, Thomas called. You signed them? He asked softly. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I did. Silence. Then he whispered, I really thought we'd fix this. I smiled sadly. Thomas, I spent 12 years fixing things. He cried quietly. I know. I looked out at Lake Zurich. You finally defended me. And I appreciate that. He laughed through tears. Too late. I closed my eyes. Too late isn't punishment, it's just reality. Another silence. Then he surprised me. Mom moved in with Rebecca. I blinked. Really? He laughed without humor. Apparently Rebecca doesn't enjoy being volunteered for everything either. I smiled despite myself. Before hanging up, Thomas whispered, you deserved better than who I was. And honestly, hearing that gave me peace. Not because I won, because I finally stopped waiting. On my 33rd birthday, I rented a small boat on Lake Zurich and brought a slice of chocolate cake, a violin I'd only been learning for 6 months, and absolutely no guilt. Sophie FaceTimed me first. Happy birthday, Mom, she shouted. I laughed. Thank you, sweetheart. She smiled through the screen. Dad made blueberry pancakes. They're terrible. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. Poor man. Then she said softly, Mom, you laugh more now. My eyes filled with tears. Do I? She nodded. I like this laugh better. Later that afternoon, I opened a package from Sophie. Inside was a card with crooked handwriting. It said, Mom, thank you for teaching me that loving people doesn't mean disappearing. I cried right there beside the lake. If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to like this video, subscribe if you'd like more stories like mine, and leave a comment telling me this. Have you ever mistaken being needed for being loved? I'd really like to know. Funny thing is, my mother-in-law thought my greatest gift would be funeral flowers. She was wrong. My greatest gift was finally giving myself back to me.